So I came across this video from a Christian who asks if atheists truly hate God. Hey, this could be interesting, I guess, but ultimately, it isn't. And I apologize up front for the bad audio quality. It's in the original, and I try not to mess with the original content as much as I can. Anyhow, let's take a look at whether or not atheists hate God, and why theists are terrified to actually address the position of most atheists.
A common comment that I see from Christian to atheist is, why do you hate God?
And that's a dumb question that proves that Christians have no idea what atheists are, what atheists think, or how atheists operate.
This is from the Grid to the Flame, and this is going to be the topic of this video. Do atheists truly hate God?
As an atheist, I have to say that I don't hate God, because I don't have any reason to think God exists. It's a bit foolish to hate something that isn't even real. Now, I can hate the idea of God. I can hate the stories written about God. I can view the character of God as a reprehensible, immoral monster based on the things he's done in the Bible. But hating God directly? What's the point?
Now, there's no universal answer to this, but the atheist generally replies saying, I'm an atheist, I do not believe God exists, therefore I cannot hate God because I can't hate something that does not exist.
Wow, he got that right. Or at the very least, he reported it correctly. And I will admit that's kind of surprising. Now, I'm not trying to imply that Christians are necessarily dishonest when reporting on what atheists say to them, although some certainly are, but a lot of them will run things through their Christian filter and only report what fits into their personal religious worldview, regardless of what the person who said it actually meant.
Somewhere in that form or fashion, I generally see this, okay? Now, because there's no universal answer to this, I can give two answers to why atheists hate God.
And there he goes, ignoring what atheists said to him and rephrasing it from a theist point of view.
I'm not saying all atheists hate God, okay?
But you're saying that atheists who already told you that they don't hate God somehow hate God.
I am not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's two instances I know of where an atheist would then truly say, I hate God.
So these are things that atheists have actually said to you, because you said that most atheists have told you that they don't hate God because they don't think God exists. Even though most atheists, by your own admission, don't hate God, do you have two examples where they specifically said they did, and now you're going to pretend that now applies to most atheists? I don't know. Let's see.
And to say I hate God is to say I hate a specific God type. Not the specific God itself, but a God type.
What does that even mean? Because I don't think you can hate a type. Looking at the dictionary definition, the only definition I can find for the verb hate requires that you direct hatred at something in particular. This makes no sense. But alright, go ahead, make your point.
If the God actually truly exists, I hate that God because of something happening. Or whatever.
That makes no sense at all. If that God doesn't exist, then nothing regarding that God is actually true. And since atheists don't believe any gods exist, then none of the stories revolving around that God's involvement ever happened. So this is really a non sequitur.
Because a certain trait was not specifically met the way I wanted it met.
Even if gods did exist, believers in those gods have not demonstrated that the traits that have been ascribed to those gods are actually so. No one has ever shown that the Christian God, for instance, has any of the traits that it's believed to have by the faithful. They're all just arbitrary until they can show that they've actually studied that God and demonstrably come to a rational conclusion about that entity's traits. All atheists can go by, all anyone can go by, are the stories told about gods in various holy books, all of which are pure mythology.
Now, what do I mean by this, okay? I knew somebody in high school, he had a tragic event happen to him. it was definitely life-altering. And in that event, his faith in God broke. His faith in God completely died out.
And while that happens, I've never thought that it's a good reason to reject belief in gods. It does tend to be the only example theists can come up with, though. The people who reject gods for emotional reasons. They never bring up those people who have sat down and unemotionally examined the evidence for their gods and found the evidence completely lacking.
He denied God's existence and truly became atheist. Now, generally speaking, in church or in like Sunday school or even from parents, we learn of God's mercy, God's love, and God's grace.
Three things that cannot be demonstrated to be accurate characteristics of God. They are, as I keep saying, simply arbitrarily assigned to this God character and can't be shown to actually be part of any real God's makeup.
I'm not going to take away from those.
But you are going to believe they are accurate because it makes you feel good to do so.
But there's more to God than just his loving mercy, his graciousness.
How do you know? How do you know anything about God? Blind faith doesn't prove anything but that you believe blindly. It doesn't provide any actual evidence that what you believe is true.
He is also a God of judgment, a God of wrath, a God of justice. He is a jealous God. There are so many different more traits that he has that is not truly always mentioned as they should be.
Says who? Now, I know I'm going off topic, but this seems like a perfect opportunity to explore this. How do you know any of this? How did you test any of it to find out if it was objectively true? It seems to me like you're just arguing for the characteristics of unicorns. Unicorns are loving, wonderful creatures who heal people with their magical horns. And how does anyone actually know any of this? These are just stories told by people who likewise have no evidence that they're true. When do we get to the actual evidence in any of these mythological tales? Never! That's when!
Now, that does not take away, I'm not saying tragic events happen to people because God's angry, God's wrathful, God's sending his justice or his judgment. I'm not saying that. I'm not taking away from any of these tragic events that truly happen.
Shit happens. There's no evidence that God, your God or any other, has anything to do with anything that happens to anyone ever.
But in these events, people's faith in God is shaken.
Because their religions tell them that God is everywhere and responsible for everything when there's no evidence for that at all.
Because they don't know God truly and wholly.
Because they buy into the unsupported and unjustified claims made about God by people who also haven't got a demonstrable clue.
They know what they have been taught.
Just like you do. Because it's impossible to know anything about gods outside of what you've been taught. There is nothing to objectively examine. There is nothing to objectively experience. Everything the believer does runs through the God filter that they've been indoctrinated with.
They know only what they've experienced.
No, I beg to differ. Because whatever experiences they have inherently run through that interpretation filter. And that's why Muslims have experiences with Allah, and Hindus have experiences with Krishna, and Christians have experiences with God. Something happens, and they turn to their beliefs to understand what happened. They never independently and objectively verify their experiences with logic, reason, and evidence. They do so with blind faith. And this is why atheists are not at all impressed with so-called religious experiences.
They have these preconceived notions on what to expect from God.
Yep, that's what religion does to you, because religion tells you that there's this God that can't be independently and objectively verified. This is what it's like, which again can't be independently verified in any way. This is what it wants you to do, again without any objective corroboration of the claims, etc. That's what religion is, and you've fallen for it.
For instance, and I've seen this plenty of times before, and heard about it as well. My mother has cancer, or my dad's in the hospital, or I need help on a test, or some other thing. Yes, the test is not necessarily a big thing, but it can be depending on the person and depending on the test itself. And they feel like God didn't deliver on that specific event.
When religion has built God up into a huge prize machine, yeah, that's what happens. But again, religion has made God out to be this all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing thing that's supposed to care about you and take care of you. And when bad things happen and people have bought into this whole God lie, of course they start to wonder if God is actually real. The fact remains, there's no real difference between a God that does not demonstrably interact in the real world and no God at all.
They think, okay, God didn't help me here, so does God truly exist? And then they go from that, and then say the mother or whatever parent had cancer dies. Then they really have their faith tested, and they're really shaken. They shake their fist at God, and then they deny God's existence afterwards, saying, if you were God, you'd truly be there when I needed you.
But honestly, what does any of this have to do with atheists? As I said at the beginning, the only people that the religious want to address are the ones who fell away from religion for emotional reasons, not those who have intellectually studied the claims made by religion and found them to be entirely lacking.
There's that one instance, and then there's another instance. Now, I've asked this to some people before, and they said, if Christianity is true, would you become a Christian?
Well, that depends on what you mean by Christianity being true. If there were actually a God, would I believe that God existed? Absolutely. Does that mean that I would bow down and worship that God? Well, it depends on the God. The Christian God is described in the Bible? No, because that God is a dick. That God hasn't earned my praise. But sure, there could be some God out there somewhere that might deserve it. Just let me know when those gods have actually been proven to be real.
Meaning, if Christianity is true, then Yahweh truly exists. Jesus truly died on the cross for our sins. Would you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?
Again, it all depends on the facts surrounding these characters. The Christian God is a self-centered asshole though, so no, I can't see myself joining his fan club even if he was real. But then again, atheism is just the rejection of claims made about the supernatural. If I stopped rejecting those claims because they were demonstrably so, I would stop being an atheist. That doesn't mean I have to become a Christian.
People have said no.
Just as I did, for good reason.
Now, that's not necessarily saying I hate God. That's saying I willfully reject God, but it can as well mean because of the instances in life that I have gone through, I am going to reject God because of things that have happened that I did not want to happen.
No, it means that judging the actual characteristics of God, again, assuming that what's written in the Bible is an accurate representation of what God is really like, it means rejecting worship of this moral monster for cause. And that's really the thing. You seem to think that there's nothing between disbelief in God and worship of God. And you're wrong.
Now, I'm hoping I'm making sense here with y'all, okay?
Not really, but that's because you're coming from an emotional position of a blind faith theist. You want to recruit people into your fan club.
And I'm not judging people on this. I'm not saying, oh, well, atheists, you all hate God. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not a universal answer where there are some that do hate God.
Not on an intellectual level. Only those who started out as religious and who used their religious indoctrination to reject God because he didn't come through for them. And that's a pretty childish, immature position to take in the first place, don't you think?
Others do not. Others do not have the knowledge that God exists. They are not taught that God exists in a specific sense.
Meaning they haven't been emotionally indoctrinated to believe things for which there's no objective evidence. And then there are those like myself who were indoctrinated, who did take it seriously, and then decided that if this God thing was real, if the Bible was real, then it should stand up to intellectual scrutiny. But when we subjected them to such, they completely fell apart. But you don't want to talk about people like that, do you?
We are taught what we are taught in church, but we're not taught how God truly exists in reality.
That's because there's no evidence that God really exists in reality. Outside of those teachings, outside of that indoctrination, outside of blind faith, there's nothing worth accepting as real because the existence of God simply does not stand up to intellectual rigor.
This is From the Grave to the Flame. Keep your heart on fire for God, and God bless.
And, as expected, there was really nothing worthwhile here because it was just an emotional screed against people who reject belief in their imaginary friends. And as anyone who has seen a bunch of my videos knows, that's ridiculously common. The religious have no intellectual arguments for their gods. They just don't. But they feel the need to attack the non-religious, who they see as the enemy, so you get really silly videos like this one, which targets only a minuscule percentage of atheists and ignores the majority who reject their beliefs for cause. But what else can they do? Atheists, by and large, don't hate gods because they don't believe in them. Pretending otherwise is downright silly. But what do you expect from people with imaginary friends?
Everything changes.